All right, well, hello, welcome. It is 12:33, so we will start. My name is Jillian Glass. I'm one of the graduate academic assistants at the Public Humanities Hub, and it's wonderful that you have all chosen to join us today for Reimagining Graduate Studies. We will begin by acknowledging that the University of British Columbia, where so many of us are privileged and fortunate enough to work and in the vicinity of which many of us live, is on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations peoples. We honor their stories, their struggles, and their diverse and rich ways of passing on tradition and educating, because UBC is not the first educational experience to happen on this land. They have their own traditions as well, and we are very privileged to be here. Without further ado, we will jump in with our presentations. We have a wonderful lineup for you today, and we are going to do a question and answer period at the very end. That said, if you don't want to forget your question, you can either write it down and keep it for later and voice it out loud, or you can put it in the chat either for everybody or to Heidi Rennert in private, and Heidi will moderate the written questions. This session is being recorded, so just a little reminder that if you're comfortable with having your name, your wonderful faces recorded, please turn your cameras on, but if not, you can turn them off and maintain some anonymity. Our first speaker today, coming from the Public Humanities Hub, is Sydney Lyons. Sydney, over to you.
So hi everyone, and thanks for coming. I also want to take a moment to say thank you to the faculty members and other mentors who are making time today in this eternal Zoom environment to participate in this necessary and important discussion about your grad students' futures. So we see you, thank you for being here. My name is Sydney Lyons. I'm a graduate academic assistant with the Public Humanities Hub and also a PhD student in English. On behalf of the grad committee today, I'm going to present briefly on the grad survey that we conducted over the summer, which is part of what inspired today's panel. So we conducted the survey at the end of June 2020, sorry, not there yet, to get a sense of humanities grad student outlooks on their career paths, on their anxieties and concerns, which were exacerbated now by the pandemic, and then also to think about what the Public Humanities Hub might be able to do to assist with some of this. So to give a brief overview, we had 68 students who participated from 11 different departments, which are all listed here on this slide. We had a good mix of PhD and master's students. It was about a 50-50 split. And as you can see from the bulleted list in the areas of study section here, there's quite an array of interests and topics. To us, this really demonstrated the kind of breadth and depth of humanities research and the potential for putting this kind of expertise to work in the world in impactful ways in places like nonprofits or government institutions or cultural institutions, et cetera. It's also worthy of note that 75% of the respondents identified as being part of an equity-seeking group. So these are students who already face some kind of marginalization, and finding other ways to help them diversify their skill sets or their career options or their networks is to us a social justice issue. We asked participants a number of questions about their perceived career preparedness. In this slide, I'm showing responses to a question about how many students post-graduation plan to look for work only inside the academy, only outside the academy, or a mixture of both. This pie chart shows that the overwhelming majority, almost 90% of students, are preparing in some way to explore career paths outside the academy. I've included some qualitative data here too, which is that quote on the right. It's an anonymous anecdote, which reads, "It would be good to see broader and more general support for alt careers throughout your studies, not just near the end and not just as professional development, but for it to be more readily and socially acceptable, for your supervisors and career counselors to be able to help you plan more readily and earlier." So 90% of respondents intend to look beyond the academy for their career paths, but how prepared do they feel to actually do that? We asked them to rate their preparedness from 1 to 5, where 5 is well prepared and 1 is not prepared at all. 64% of respondents rated their preparedness at a 3 or lower. So you'll notice that those 3 light blue slices on that pie chart together make up that percentage of students who essentially felt neutral at best to negative about their preparedness for a career outside the academy. And we have another anonymous quote here from a doctoral student who says, "I'm aware that it's very unlikely I'll get a job in academia, but all my training so far has been geared toward that very thing, professionalism classes, the dissertation especially. I know I have transferable skills for alt-ac, but I don't see clearly what they are. So I don't really know what all my options are, and this is quite terrifying. I guess I really don't know how I'm going to market myself post-PhD." So this is all to say that we've begun making changes at the Public Humanities Hub in response to the survey results. We now have a grad committee working on grad issues and a new grad event series of which this panel today is a part. We're hoping that today's panel can help highlight some of the existing conversations around reimagining what graduate education looks like, and also showcase opportunities for grad students they can do at UBC right now. I want to also point out a new grad resources webpage we've compiled at the Hub, and these links should be entering the chat soon if they're not already there. Which provide funding resources, a video playlist, a reading list of articles, websites, and other tools for thinking through diverse career options and professionalization for humanities grads, and more. The page also hosts the full survey report with specific recommendations for humanities departments, for supervisors, and other career counselors. So please check it out, please read it, please share it, and without further ado, I'll send you off now to the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Sydney, setting the stage for the conversations we're going to have. And of course, questions about the survey are welcome. Reminder for those who are just joining us, you can save all your questions for the Q&A, which will be at the end. But if you want to not forget them in the meantime, you can put them in the chat, you can send them to Heidi, or you can write them on something you have at home and ask them with your own voice later. That's always a good option. Up next, we have Susan Porter, who is the Dean and Vice Provost of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies, who will be talking about the Reimagining the PhD Symposium and Report. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to try to share my screen here. So reimagining the PhD, I was asked to speak on the report, but I think it's important to provide some background about how that came to be and how where that fits in the greater work that we're doing at UBC around reimagining the PhD. So as a very big question, why are we reimagining and why now? And simple answer, many different things. So when we first started this work, it was about a decade ago, we were mostly interested in the fact that PhD careers were diversifying, and we really needed to rethink things in that regard. But there's also lots of other reasons, and all the streams we felt seemed to lead to this one area of reform of doctoral and graduate education. So the relationship of the academy to society is different. Student ambitions are changing, and I've discovered that myself over the past few years. Changing modes of knowledge production and dissemination and innovation are happening in the academy and outside the academy. And I think one of the most important things that I've discovered over the last decade is the increasing complexity and interdependence and ambiguity and volatility in the world. And this translates to not only the grand wicked problems that exist, but the workplaces that we'll experience, the types of questions we'll be asking. And so it's a hugely important reason for, I think, reimagining the PhD. So this is, sort of a very high-level summary again of some of the things that have prompted us to do this, and just a bit more detail about what I've just talked about. So knowledge creation and mobilization. In the 19th and 20th century, it was really mostly linear and subject-oriented. So the graduate research that occurred was mostly around a subject area. Well, it still is in many things. We've called, not we, but others, people have called this mode 1 type of research. It's been called normal research as opposed to post-normal, which I'll mention in a bit. In the 21st century, that's much more iterative. So research is often more contextualized in the locus of interest, multi-sectoral, collaborative, problem-inspired, and that has been called mode 2 or post-normal. And there's different ways of approaching that, and they have to be approached differently. We've become the engaged university. I doubt you'd find a single university strategic plan didn't have the word engaged in it. Our problems are no longer, well, I'm not sure if they ever were, but they're more assuredly not solvable by disciplinary or single disciplinary epistemological approaches. We know that student well-being is very much on the radar, and it's probably, well, it is exacerbated, and I'll come back to that a little bit. Student identities. So especially at the doctoral level, students have traditionally been identity as an academic. This is what they want. This is how they see themselves. Now in the 21st century, partly because of the diversity of careers, partly because of necessity, but partly because of students are different people now. They want to be analysts. They want to be change agents. They want to be leaders. They want to be innovators. They want to be experts, and so on and so forth. So it's not just an academic. And so this, I think, is very relevant to the previous one on well-being. If we tell our students who want to be innovators and change agents, no, you leave that at the door. This is what you're going to be in the academy. Then I think that I honestly think that is a source of non-well-being in the academy. So employers, I think we all know, I'm going to focus on PhDs, but I think all of this is relevant in many ways to masters. Employers are much broader. Careers are many in a lifetime. We don't just have one career, one job. We actually have many, and they're more portfolio-based than job-based. Usually the work that students will do when they graduate is collaborative. It's much broader than what they would have focused on in their graduate studies. The modes of communication and knowledge mobilization are vast. So to do the work of the scholar, and I use that word very broadly, whether you're inside or outside the academy, you will need to mobilize knowledge. You will need to create knowledge. And the way one communicates and mobilizes that is extraordinarily large. You need to do organizational plans. You need to do communications to diverse audiences for different reasons. You might need to create policies. These are all the work of the scholar in the world. Yet we more often than not don't address those in the academy. So scholarly approaches, the methodologies of scholarship tend to be discipline specific that students learn, but when they're in the world, whether in the academy or not, they will be generally using a lot of much more variety. So therefore, graduates need to be, I'm stopping using the word discovery for a variety of reasons, which I can talk about, but students will have to reveal, create, synthesize, and critically assess knowledge. And they've always had to do that. That's part of the PhD. Communicate to peers and ask important questions. Those are always part of what it meant to do a PhD. But given the circumstances that I've talked about, they will need to be able to make change happen. They would need to, and I think this is probably the most important, they'd be able to perceive, to see, understand, integrate, and employ diverse perspectives, subject areas, methodologies, and ways of knowing. And that is, I think, if I were to distill it down to one, I think that would be it. And ways of knowing include things like Indigenous ways of knowing, our creative ways of knowing, in the humanities, scientific ways of not knowing, in the sciences, humanities ways of knowing. I think this is going to be key. This is key. Think in systems, and I think you only have to think of COVID to realize that we are in a very complex system, that there are so many interdependencies and interactions. If you don't think in systems, you're not going to be able to address problems either in your local work environment or the world. So complex problems, making sense of them and developing. So these are all things that require different ways of thinking. Effectively adapt to different environments, communicate to different partners for different reasons, understand and apply theories of learning. So if in our survey of PhD graduates, the vast majority of humanities graduates were teaching as a pretty integral part of what they were doing. Not necessarily in the academy, not necessarily as tenure track, but they were teaching. How important is that? To tolerate, we live in a very volatile and ambiguous world. It's so critical to be able to tolerate that. And I think that I feel very strongly that that's not only important for our scholarship, but also for our own mental health and well-being. The idea that there's black and white, that there's binary system of logics is not helpful in the long run. And then, of course, develop valued by others and by yourself, constructive and fulfilling identities. So these are big asks. These are big asks. And I don't know if we can necessarily say that we developed these all in graduate school. Certainly the way we're doing things traditionally, there wasn't a lot of opportunity to develop these kinds of things. They are higher order cognitive and metacognitive abilities, and they're moral, emotional, practical, and ontological. They're very deep, they're very holistic. They can't be learned by a workshop on a Friday afternoon. These have been lumped together. Some people have called them post-formal thinking abilities. It's very consistent with what traditional ideas of wisdom are. And then Sternberg back in the 80s, I guess, 70s. It's also very consistent with the idea of multiple intelligences, which include not only analytical, but practical and creative. So because this is such a big ask, I don't think it's fair to say that we can do everything we've always done and we just add a few extras to top it up, as it were. But I really do think that's not the way we have to go in the long run. So and I think we have to reimagine the PhD, rethink it from the start, from its purpose. What is its purpose? It's different than it was in 1980. The structure, the traditional conceptions of research, which is the topic of this day, dissertation, the culture, the pedagogies. So I'm just going to briefly cover sort of where we've been as a grad school and how this led to the report along the way. So it was around 2011 that we really started thinking that this was an important thing to focus on, and we didn't know, is it possible? How would we do this? Will the Academy even want or accept this? Should we work with faculty first or students first? We ended up, as you can see, working with students first. Is there a grad school role or not? Maybe there isn't. Maybe it's something that has to happen only at the discipline level. So we sort of socialized and consulted and thought about this further. And in 2014, we held a symposium, the first symposium on reimagining. And one of the speakers there was Russell Berman, who was the just stepped down as the head of the Modern Language Association. And another one was Andrew Seri, who was at the time a grad dean at Berkeley. And I think we felt that we had the green light to go ahead. There was a lot of enthusiasm. So we created this advisory group, and in 2015, we launched the first of what we were doing to see if this is viable in the Academy, the Public Scholars Initiative, which Ty and Serbian will talk more about. It really was to address the very things that I've been talking about. So different ways of knowing, collaboration across sectors. So we used there's multiple definitions of public scholars, and we used the very broadest definition. So things like different forms of making knowledge about, for, and with diverse publics, not necessarily the public, involving mutually beneficial partnerships between higher education and those in the public and private sectors. It's intellectual work that produces a public good. And so it is most broadly conceived of what it is. So includes private sector, includes other partners within the university as well. So for example, we've had a lot of students do partnerships with teaching faculty and actually have a dissertation chapter that is about the scholarship of teaching and learning in a science chapter, for example, in a science dissertation. At the same time, we expanded our dissertation parameters, the external examiner letter, to ensure that we valued these kinds of things. And we promoted supervisory committee membership from outside the Academy to better enable that cross fertilization outside the Academy. And I said since 2015, we've had about a 50% increase across the university in non-academic supervisory committee members. So then in 2016, we launched the Kiln Connection course, which is a you might have just seen a call out for this year's. It's a course on public scholarship, basically, that is at the graduate level, interdisciplinary and public facing. And then in 2017, we completed our PhD career outcomes survey, and we held the Reimagining the PhD Symposium, which we've talked about. And so that was a way to take stock of where we were. And to enable the university community and beyond to listen, to hear what's happening, and to listen to a diversity of voices talking about this subject, because it really was, I think, a growing interest in all sectors. So we had people, representatives from SSHRC, from the Government of Canada, from the Canadian Museum of History, from the Council of Graduate Schools, Kathy Woodward from the Simpson Center for Humanities, and a number of others. I would say, yeah, so I'll carry on with this. Okay, in 2018, at that point, I was president of the Canadian Association for Graduate Studies. So we did a 2-year consultation across the country on the dissertation. We had humanities folk in the mix on this, and we produced a task force report that was quite broad, I think, and had a number of recommendations in it. At the same time, we launched a website on Rethinking the PhD that has a lot of great resources and examples of broadened dissertations and interviews with students and things like that. So, and then in 2019, we surveyed about 20 different grad schools across the country just to see whether what they were following forward with the recommendations. And then what we're working on now, which I can, sorry, I can say the survey showed that they were indeed very interested, but they were doing them somewhat sporadically. So since 2019, I've put these in very faint boxes because we're still working on them, a collaborative PhD. So the idea is reimagining what a dissertation could be if it's collaborative from as many disciplines as humanities and engineering, science and medicine. We're looking at concurrent credentials that we've been, excuse me, I'm sorry for my voice, talking about for years, things like knowledge mobilization, policy, indigenous, and so on. We're looking at dissertation assessors, which are the variety of dissertations that have come up have been incredible. Sometimes they're not easily accessible by an academic, and so we're looking at non-academic assessors. Courses, resources, and I think promotion and tenure criteria, which is, we're not doing ourselves because that's out of our bailiwick, but it's something we're very highly promoting. Finally to come back to the symposium, I think it was a very affirming event. There was a very strong common message and really an urgent call to collective action and to continue on the routes that we were going. As a university community, to continue to reflect and continue to change as the world is changing around us. And here are some of the key findings that I would say. So it's a need for student-centric education, which it sounds like it's an obvious thing, but it was not an obvious thing for a couple of centuries really. To look towards the anticipated needs of the student, of the workplace and society. A need to understand the limits of one's scholarly paradigm. A need to be able to address the world's grand challenges and to be adaptable to multiple environments. We saw firsthand how so many students are passionate about making a difference. And we did talk about some critical abilities, which are the ones we've talked about: collaboration, interdisciplinary habits of mind, which was Suzanne Ortega's verbiage, and then the importance of multiple points of view and rhetorical and epistemological flexibility. So the recommendations were for continued culture shift and support for engaged scholarship and non-traditional outputs, to encourage supervisory members, which we've discussed, to create more opportunities for transdisciplinary and collaborative scholarship. Develop assessment and learning frameworks. We haven't got too far in that, but I think that is something I continue to think is really important. And then to recognize the value of public-facing scholarship in faculty reward systems, which I've best mentioned. So I think we're continuing to work on this, and I'm so delighted that the Public Humanities Hub exists. It's a wonderful thing, and I'm really happy that you're doing it and that you're so engaged in this area and having this thing today. So I'll just leave with a quote from Daniel Coit-Gilman, who was really the originator of the idea of the PhD in North America. back in the 19th century. And he talked about, the PhD is for the service of society. So what does that mean? It means that every epoch really needs to rethink what it is. And so I think we're in the midst of this, and it's an extraordinary, exciting time. And so I'm so glad you're all also interested in this and working together on this. That's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Susan. What an excellent quote to send us off into the discussions with folks who are doing some of that reimagining. And thank you for your administrative context and furthering the discussion at the administrative level. Up next, we have Serbian Tehran, who is a coordinator at the Public Scholars Initiative, and Ty Paradella, who is themselves one of those public scholars. So I will give you the virtual stage. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Jillian, for having us. I'm going to take the first 10 minutes and then I'll leave the last 10 minutes to Ty. And speaking of public scholars, I also would like to say that despite his best attempts, I recognize Henry. I can see you're hiding yourself with all this mask, but he's also one of our public scholars. And this probably speaks a little bit to the impact that we've had. So it's fairly good that my talk comes right after Susan's, because the PSI is an attempt to reimagine the PhD at UBC. It started as a pilot program. And I have given maybe 100 talks about the PSI in the last 3.5 years. And I always have these 10 minutes PSI, 15 minutes PSI, half an hour PSI slides on the side. And this time for this particular talk, I said, you know what? I'm going to this humanities-oriented hub where we all believe in the power of the word. I'll try without the slides for once. But if everybody's burning to see slides, I have so many right here, and I'm very happy to share all of them with you. So my talk generally follows 3 aspects. What is the PSI? How do we support our public scholars? And what is the impact that we had so far at UBC? So what is the PSI? I think Susan's already laid the groundwork fantastically, because it is an attempt to reimagine the PhD. It comes out of an attempt to reimagine the PhD. And I think, again, the case is fairly clear about why we should reimagine the PhD, but when I'm asked, I always use this example. Now, there's quite a lot of us here who are all literate people, and I would like to ask you, using reactions in the Zoom button, just a show of hands, how many of you have heard of this work called Difficulties Concerning the Identity of the Democritean and Epicurean Philosophy of Nature? Zoe did. It actually belongs, it's the PhD of the PhD work of this one person who is a really obscure figure in history that you may not have heard of, by the name of Karl Marx. This is his PhD. He wrote it in 1841, and it's like 120, 130 pages. Okay. And he wrote it in 1841, and it is fair to say, from your reaction and the reaction that I've gauged so far in the previous years, that it is his least well-known, least impactful work, because it wasn't expected of him to make an impact with his PhD. And he knew he wasn't going to make an impact with his PhD, so he made his impact in other ways. The reality is, I also have a PhD that was submitted about 2 centuries after Marx's. And even though mine is obviously much better and a timeless classic that will be recognized by everybody in the centuries to come, it is more or less identical in the form that we have done it, in the content, in what it's supposed to do. And it is in itself a little bit sad to say that things haven't changed when it comes to our dissertation in that 2 centuries. And the reality is, if we were to transport Karl Marx from his time to now, maybe one of the very few things that he would immediately recognize is, yeah, okay, that's a PhD. I have one of those. And that is a sad statement in and of itself, because I don't know how else to explain how much we've changed in the last 200 years, how much the world has changed. So the PSI comes out of a very clear and somewhat belated recognition that, yes, we really need to reimagine the PhD for our epoch. And it's an interesting epoch, ours is. So what we have tried to do in the beginning, I have joined the PSI about 4 years ago, so building on very solid foundations. The goal has always been to reimagine the PhD based on a few different criteria. What we champion is acknowledging that most graduate students come into the PhD not in an attempt to get rich or get very wide recognition, but in an attempt to have an impact, to change things for the better. So the academia has not been always welcoming to a drive for an impact outside academia, but also inside academia. And it's another attempt to also recognize the innovation that has since happened and attempt to reimagine what the dissertation looks like also. So all the words, all the things that Susan's already said, interdisciplinarity, collaborative PhDs, having an impact, a public good, a tangible impact on the public good in whatever form that takes in your particular discipline, in your particular faculty. All of these were put into the big cauldron out of which popped out the PSI, the Public Scholars Initiative. And when I'm asked what is public scholarship, one of the kind of trite answers that I try to give that it looks very different if you're a public scholar in philosophy, if you're a public scholar in forestry, if you're a public scholar in chemical engineering. But I have also seen with my own eyes that when you have these public scholars sit down, they immediately recognize each other's work as public scholarship, even though they have very little idea about each other's discipline. So I think what unites public scholarship is this desire to have your work have a genuine impact outside the dissertation's very limited boundaries. And again, it does take different forms everywhere. So our attempt is to encourage and support public scholars because we're very aware at the PSI that the path is laid by the public scholars who are trying to do public scholarship. And in our way, we're just trying to show the path, saying this is the way, and trying to support some of those public scholars who put themselves through so much difficulty, expending more energy, more resources, more time, more mental health in trying to get things done that are not necessarily asked of them by the academia. And in some cases, at least that was the case, I think previously, now it's less so. And in some cases, actively opposed by very well-meaning faculty members who are suspicious of this novel thing that their student is trying to do because it's not necessary and it's wasting time and resources. So our attempt at the Public Scholars Initiative is to help graduate students, support graduate students as they themselves reimagine the PhD, what it looks like in their own discipline. And we do it in a few different ways. The very first way, and I think this is the biggest, I really genuinely think this is the biggest, is to simply throw them in the network of public scholars. In our 6th year now, we have over 220 public scholars. 50 plus of them have already graduated and moved on, some of them in academic positions. More than those are in non-academic positions, but doing a lot of incredibly remarkable work. And I'm very happy to talk about all of them one by one if you're interested later. And we throw public scholars into this particular network. And this one example is the one that I always go to. And every September, we have our launch event with public scholars, and we do a welcome event, and they all come and they listen to some talks and they meet each other. And then we go and get some drinks all together. And all public scholars join us, and you just have to be there and see these people who have so far thought that they were just alone in their individual silos, that they were doing this rare thing in their department that not everybody really understands why, immediately connect with 50 other people from all these different departments and immediately recognize, I have a place in academia. It's a very valuable place. This is, I think, our most valuable contribution to public scholars is the network. We support the network by providing them with a PSI workshop series. We support the network by this exhaustive website profile. If you're interested, our website has just been shared. So you can just go check all of their profiles. We support them by helping them with public communication skills, by getting videos. We used to have this PhDs Go Public event where scholars are trained in giving a Pecha Kucha style talk, and we used to book the venue and invite everybody we can get our hands on, and we would go there and the scholars would speak, and we would we would record their talks and upload it on their profiles. You know, in the olden days where you could shake people's hands and stuff. So instead, now we're just doing the videos because we believe it's a very valuable skill. So we support the network by helping with promotion, helping with developing different skill sets that they might have, adding different competencies that they might have that they would like to develop. We also, of course, help them academically to the extent that this is possible. And this does take many different forms, but it suffices to say that some public scholars have already submitted dissertations that don't look like a dissertation from 50 years ago. Some of them have documentary pieces. Some of them have 25-minute short movies that have been shown in international film festivals elsewhere. Others are working on graphic novels as part of their dissertation. Others have already submitted their dissertations, a chapter of which is a website that they have developed. So all of these different ways of reimagining the dissertation is also encouraged and supported at the PSI. And finally, and this is the level that mostly attracts the first-comers, we also fund them, of course. And the first-comer graduate students are always like, there is money then? Why don't you come to the money part first? Because it is the least of what we offer. I do acknowledge the value, but it is genuinely the least of what we offer. We offer public scholars up to $10,000 twice, so up to $20,000 of funding to carry out their public scholarship. Our impact in my small mind has been quite remarkable. It is less than what I thought it would be 3 years ago when I started, but it is way more than what I now realistically think it should have been, because the impact just reverberates. Scholars speak to each other, and people who, you know, before hearing of PSI, before coming to the PSI, thought that I made a mistake, there is no place for me in academia. At the end of their PSI tenure, at the end of their time with the PSI, end up thinking, I think there is a place for me in academia. I think there is a valuable place for me in academia. I think there's an existence for me where I can continue doing what I love to do. And the PSI has been instrumental in helping them think this way. So I think our impact has been in that way transformative, not only on the students, but also on the faculty members who's had many students, but also on the faculties themselves, on the department themselves. And if I can pat myself on the back, honestly, globally also, we're getting more and more recognition. And of course, here, I just have to put the flag next to Susan, because I think since the time I started, she's been to 50 different meetings in 20 different countries talking about the PSI. And so, yes, this has been the PSI, and I think we're going to be here for another while because we're very happy doing what we're doing. And I'm incredibly happy seeing how every year more scholars come with their eyes shining because they found this place in academia where they're doing this thing. Our goal is in that 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, we're not going to be necessary anymore because everybody can just do public scholarship as a matter of course if they wish to. And I think until that transformation is complete, we're going to stay around. So thank you for having me. Ty, I turn to you now.
Thank you so much, Serbian. While my virtual background says that I'm in Vancouver, I'm actually in the unceded ancestral territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe in what is now known Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, and I will explain to you later on why I'm here. I want to start my sharing, and Serbian is a really hard act to follow, by acknowledging the broader context of our current context, which is the pandemic. Not just the pandemic, but the reckonings around racism, injustice, and inequality, and adding to the continuing struggles against climate change, indigenous dispossession, and gender-based violence. And so with this broader context in mind, we'll start thinking about what does reimagining the graduate studies, what does reimagining the PhD mean in these within this broader context. And I don't necessarily have the answers to this question. I think Susan has hinted on a few ways of addressing this question, but I'm posing this question because I want to underscore the urgency, its urgency within our current context. And I use it to anchor what I will be sharing today about my experiences as a Public Scholars Initiative Fellow. And I also just want to say that I'm mindful of my privilege of being a PSI Fellow, of receiving funding to explore the different possibilities of and for my dissertation, of having extra intellectual and emotional support from Susan, Mary, Jackie, Serbian, and colleagues from the Humanities Hub and fellows from the PSI as well. I'm mindful that the PSI has become more competitive, or at least the funding aspects of the funding part of the PSI has become more competitive over the years as more doctoral students apply. But fortunately, there are other opportunities now that doctoral students and master students could apply to, which our other panelists are going to discuss today. When I applied, there was just the PSI. And so I bring this up to acknowledge that sometimes discussions around these new initiatives, around this funding initiatives might be triggering to some doctoral students. This discussion sometimes could cause more anxieties about our capabilities as emerging scholars, and the obstacles that we face as PhD students, of perhaps being not good enough in qualifying for these programs. But let me also point out that one can reimagine one's PhD outside of these initiatives, or even in parallel to these initiatives. And I want to recognize UBC, G+PS, Faculty of Arts, the Humanities Hub, for building the structures that would allow us to do so without necessarily competing for these programs. So I encourage everyone to apply to all these programs, but also know that these are not the be-all end-all of reimagining one's doctoral program, and there are more opportunities now, which I'm really happy about. So today, I just want to focus my talk on two broad reflections. My two broad reflections as a PSI Fellow, and I'll be echoing a lot of points that Susan and Serbian have already made. The first is, as a PSI Fellow, I actually got out more from it than I thought I would. I learned skills that I thought I did not need to learn, or I did not think would be useful for me. So I applied to the PSI because I wanted to explore digital humanities. I thought it would be useful to my research on mass media audiences in the Philippines in the 20th century. So my work examines how audiences were constituted as such by surveys from the 1960s and 1970s. And I thought, digital tools would help me in analyzing and visualizing my sources. So my interest initially was, very, very narrow. I did learn the skills, and I get to use the tools for my dissertation, although I did not get to do what I really wanted due to other constraints and considerations, which we could discuss later. But for me, the biggest impact that the PSI had was in introducing me to opportunities that I did not even consider before. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm based in Ottawa. I'm currently working as a senior policy analyst for Women and Gender Equality Canada, a federal department of the Canadian government. I work in the knowledge mobilization team of the Gender-Based Violence Division, and my work more broadly is to facilitate the deployment of research for the development of policies and programs. So in my work, I get to use my training as a historian as well as the skills that I learned from the PSI. But I would not have considered working in this knowledge mobilization team had I not been introduced to the concept and practice of knowledge mobilization. And this is what Susan was, and I'm so happy that Susan discussed it earlier, because this is such a good segue to my walk, to this talk. So In the humanities, of course, we talk a lot about knowledge production and knowledge circulation, but not so much about mobilization. And it was through the workshops and other opportunities organized by PSI that I really learned about knowledge mobilization. Learning about KM and doing this kind of work at the same time had fed into my dissertation work. It was only later that I realized that the historical actors that I'm writing about, the bureaucrats, researchers, policymakers, and data analysts, were doing what I'm currently doing for the federal government. So in a sense, I have become them. And this has sustained me in my writing as I finish my dissertation. So when people ask me if I'm using my graduate training, I tell them, you bet I am. So I'm so happy for the PSI for facilitating this path for me. My second critical reflection is about networks and solidarities. And I think Sir Bülent has also spoken about this earlier. And I'm talking about solidarities, not just with the communities that we are working with in our research, but also with other doctoral students. Being a PSI fellow had made me aware of the conditions that underpin our work as doctoral students. And through PSI, I became involved in graduate student advocacy. And that includes graduate supervision, which is an important condition for reimagining the PhD. And through the PSI, I became active in the Graduate Student Society. And as part of the Graduate Student Society, I got the opportunity to support more initiatives such as the PSI. So being in a PSI is also a responsibility to give back and to build those solidarities. I pursue those solidarities because I want to give that back to the UBC community. But I must say that the work that I have done in student advocacy has also helped me pursue an alternative academic career. So let me end with a plug of sorts, a short plug of sorts. I got this position in the federal government through the Recruitment for Policy Leaders program. So it is a program by the Canadian government to attract public scholars, master students, PhD students who want to work for the Canadian federal government. And I have since become part of the RPL community. And I would encourage everyone to check it out. And if you have questions about this program, please feel free to reach out to me, and I will be happy to talk to you more about this pathway for doctoral students, for masteral students. And I believe my email address is in the invitation, or I can post it here in the chat thread later on. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ty. Thank you, Sir Bülent. That was excellent. We're going to turn now to more opportunities for graduate students with Letitia Henville, who is coming to us from the Arts Co-op and the newly launched Arts Amplifier, as well as Henry John, who is also working as a PhD in the co-op program, unless I'm much mistaken. All right, excellent. No, oh.
No, that's okay. He'll tell you.
I'll let you correct it then. All right, over to you.
Thanks, Jillian, and thanks, Ty, as well. It was nice to hear about your work and to listen to your critical reflections. Hi, everyone. My name is Letitia Henville. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm joining you today from the traditional, ancestral, unceded, and stolen territory of the Musqueam people. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about the PhD co-op program and the Arts Amplifier initiative. And when I talk about these two options, I'm very aware that they're nothing that's actually substantially new. Musqueam people, like other Indigenous folks on Turtle Island, know that learning isn't something that's bounded to the walls of the classroom, the archive, the library, the museum, and that knowledge is not the exclusive domain of academics. And so when I do my territorial acknowledgement, I acknowledge the debt that settlers like me owe for living and working on occupied territory, but I also acknowledge the intellectual debt that I owe to the folks on whose land I live. And now I want to pass the virtual microphone over to Henry to introduce himself as well.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name's Henry, as Letitia mentioned. I go by he and or they, whatever works. And I'm coming to you from the unceded territories of the Subaset, Ditidat, and Cowetson First Nations. And I'm going to be talking to you about my experiences with the Arts PhD Co-op program and my work here at the Katza Station Museum and Archives.
Thanks, Henry. So I run the PhD Co-op program, as well as a new initiative that you've already heard about just now. It's in its pilot year and it's called the Arts Amplifier. So PhD Co-op is a program. It's limited to PhD students in English, history, philosophy, Germanic studies, and gender, race, and social justice. And because it's a program, you need to apply to get in, usually around the time that you're either about to go up for candidacy or you've just achieved candidacy. This word co-op is university jargon. It refers to paid internships. And in the co-op program, you apply for 4-month full-time jobs. And you sort of interweave those jobs mixed in with your dissertation research and writing. You also do some required training before you go out for your first co-op job, and you get the support of a person who cares about your career. Her name is Letitia. She is me. Hello. PhD Co-op is a small program. I think we have around 8 PhD Co-op students at the moment. And so if you are part of PhD Co-op, then I'm able to provide you with individualized supports as you move through your PhD. Henry is a PhD Co-op student in history, as well as a UBC public scholar, and he'll tell you about his experience in just a minute, but I want to mention that the kinds of experience that Henry is going to talk about are also available through the Arts Amplifier. It's just that the Arts Amplifier is for all graduate students and all postdocs in the Faculty of Arts, so it's a much bigger thing. So we ask people who take parts in Arts Amplifier programming to be more responsible for doing more of the work. So if PhD Co-op adds 1 year to your degree, because you do 3 of these 4-month work terms, the Arts Amplifier, it's designed to be more of a lighter touch. It adds as much time as you want it to add to your degree. In the Arts Amplifier, we offer paid internships that are about half the length of time as a co-op work term. So they're 2 months full-time or 4 months part-time. But we'll also help you to design your own collaborative off-campus project for which we think you should be paid because labor deserves compensation. But we have no money to give you. We have $0 to hand out to students. What we do instead is we have a grants editor, a dedicated grants editor who works only on non-research grants. And she works with you to help you to secure external funding for your work or your project. I think of the Arts Amplifier as a professional development program, and most professional development programs at universities focus on deficits, on weaknesses. They say, you need training in time management. So we have a time management workshop, and it is on Tuesday at 3 p.m. And as Dr. Porter already told us, that model, while it's useful, while it has its place, that alone isn't enough to meet the demands of a 21st century graduate education. So in the Arts Amplifier, we take an asset-based, strengths-based approach. So whatever your skills, expertise, interests, networks, community connections, ideas, we take those, we amplify those, we turn them into something that could be useful and relevant for your career, whatever you want your career to be. Today, we've been talking about things that would be helpful if you're thinking about a non-academic career, that sort of transition, that alt-ac thing. But if you want to be an academic, silly to say this, that job market is tough. So let's have a conversation about what you could do to stand out if you are applying for a research or a teaching intensive job, which is something that you'd always, of course, also need to consult with your dissertation supervisor, or you'd need to talk with a faculty member who you trust. So that is my couple of minutes of teaser. That's the difference between the two options, PhD co-op and Arts Amplifier. And now I'm going to pass the virtual microphone over to Henry, who will tell you a bit about the two PhD co-op work terms that he has done in 2020.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Letitia. And thank you to the organizers of this really important event. Yeah, so I signed up for co-op by about the second year of my PhD. I had come to the decision that the traditional academic tenured pathway of employment likely wasn't going to be for me for a whole variety of reasons. And so I was trying to think of ways I could look for alternatives. And the co-op program seemed to be a really great way of doing that. When I signed up for a program, I got this incredible amount of training and support from Letitia, as well as other folks in the office. And then my work placement, which arrived, was working here at a small museum and archives in what's now called Lake Cowichan, at the intersection of Coast Salish and New Chalnuth territories on basically the center of Vancouver Island. What I've been doing here is this small museum somehow managed to get their hands on the entire 100-year records of the largest forestry union in Canada, the International Woodworkers of America. My dissertation research explores forestry politics and logging protests in British Columbia in the 80s and 90s. This was a match made in heaven for sure. So I've spent 2 work terms here, and my role here has changed as the more time I've spent here. So when I arrived here, I thought that my role would purely be learning how to archive, which in part it has been. I have been archiving these records to make them accessible for researchers to come here, and also been promoting what is in these records via a blog and different avenues such as conferences. But as I've been here more and kind of got more attached to the records themselves, I've kind of started taking on more of a project management role with this archive. So applying for funding to make sure that there is that long-term future for the records here. And then also training. I had a couple of trainees who have been working with me, who I've been training how to archive. So that's kind of what I've been doing. And I have to say that this work has been, so far in terms of my PhD education, the most fulfilling, and in terms of my own growth, yeah, it's been pretty much the best thing I've done through my PhD. Sorry, Serbian, I haven't been a part of a PSI long enough yet to say the same about the PSI, but we're getting there, right? Yeah, so what have I gained in terms of my work here? Well, in terms of technical skills, I've learned skills in archiving and records management. I've learned how to publicly present my work in this blog. And I've learned a lot about grant writing, project management. These are all skills I already had, to be honest. I just learned how to apply them. Maybe not the archiving stuff, but the other stuff. And it's really helped me realize how much I actually have to contribute to the world beyond the academic institution. Yeah, and then impact at the same time as that, the impact on my research has been monumental, because these records were records I was actually looking for the entire first 2 years of my PhD. And then I just they happened to need archiving. So yeah, having access to these records has really developed my dissertation. And I've also built incredible community links with the forestry community here in Lake Cowichan, with folks from the labor union. And I'm also in the process of building relations with the Subaset First Nation, the local First Nation. This is more working on the museum side of things. And because, yeah, to ensure that their history is also represented in this museum, which if it currently isn't. And that's actually something that I am working with the Arts Amplifier team in working towards. Actually, currently, I've finished my 2 work terms here, and I'm now working here part-time. So it's led to further employment as well, and also just led to me falling in love with rural life and rural culture. And yeah, I'm here to stay. So I'm going to pass back to Letitia now. So yeah, thank you, everyone.
Yeah. One thing that I've heard you talk about a fair bit, Henry, is like the people who you got to talk to as a result of your co-op that you wouldn't have been in conversation with otherwise. I know that you, before your co-op work term, had, you know, lots of connections to environmentalists, connections with Indigenous groups, and it's this third piece of the triangle for you. I'm speaking on your behalf now. Is there anything else you want to say, or have I accurately summarized it?
Yeah, like I've been, I've now built connections with that community. I have research participants who, you know, have been working as fallers, loggers for, you know, 50 years, and one person in particular basically has trained all fallers in the Cowichan Valley for the last 30 years. I'm in touch with people who are leaders in the union, and yeah, these are totally people that I would not have had pretty much any way of contacting. I'm now considered an insider in that community, and yeah, which is obviously a completely different positionality to be a researcher in as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Henry. So PhD co-op, as I've mentioned, is an option for students in English, history, philosophy, Germanic studies, and gender, race, and social justice. I'm just going to put the URL for PhD co-op in the chat, as well as my own email address. So if you're in one of the eligible disciplines, you should sign up for PhD co-op if you're still pretty early in your degree and you're interested in doing work experiences that are more in-depth, more rich, that give you that time to grow those relationships like Henry has talked about, to work through whether or how or if you might want your experience in this off-campus work, or could be on-campus work as well, your experience in your work to shape the whole of your PhD experience. The Arts Amplifier, in contrast, is for students who maybe aren't in one of those 5 specific degree programs. Arts Amplifier is for PhD students, but also MA students and MFA students and all of those other M's in the faculty. And it's also for people who aren't even students at all, who are doing postdocs in the Faculty of Arts. But the Arts Amplifier is only for grad students and postdocs in arts, so my apologies to those of you who are in different faculties out there. We are not able to support you. You fall outside of our areas of expertise. And while we can't provide you with one-on-one support like we can with arts grad students and postdocs, I can encourage you to check out our online ad hoc on-demand training, which is available to anyone with a campus-wide login. And we have training in the ethics of community engagement and storytelling for change that was brought to us by CSIL, our on-campus partners. We have training in the power of story and starting up consulting and freelancing. And we have recordings of past webinars on starting your own publicly engaged, not just public facing, but publicly engaged projects. We have training on winning grants as an artist, aligning community engagement with a teaching intensive career in an institution like Capilano University or North Island College, and in sort of like advanced networking stuff going beyond just doing an informational interview. So if you are interested in seeing if doing some sort of public engagement project is right for you, here is the link to our Get Support form. And because I'm adding links, I am going to add just one more link too. This last one is to the Sustainability Scholars Program, which is actually not a part of the Arts Amplifier. So it is open to anyone in any faculty who's a graduate student at UBC. My colleague, Karen Taylor, is here in the room. She runs the Sustainability Scholars Program. It is yet another option that is available to you. And so I thought I'd highlight that as something that you should know about. There is one last thing that I want to say, and that is for the people in the room who are currently feeling like, well, this isn't for me, this isn't my area of interest, or, well, you know, someone like Henry, he studies really contemporary stuff, and I study 15th century French dance, so, you know, not right for my discipline. I can't really do publicly engaged stuff or community engaged stuff. And if that's you, if you would like to do this kind of thing, but you think it doesn't fit with your area of interest, I want to tell you that is something that I have heard from people across the disciplines. Everyone thinks, oh, well, my discipline is not the right fit. It's for other people. I think that's a problem with the culture of academia because it is a failure of imagination, and that's a failure of imagination that has something you've learned, something you've acquired. So I like to use the example of the 17th century writer Aphra Behn, and let's pretend that you study the prose poem proto-novels of Aphra Behn, and you feel like, well, there's no point in me doing this kind of thing because there's no community that is super invested in the prose poem proto-novels of Aphra Behn, so there's no one with whom I can engage. And to you, I say, why do you study Aphra Behn? Why should anyone care about what you're spending all this time and energy and money to better understand? When you go to the MLA or some other big conference and you're trying to speak with other people who are in your discipline, but maybe they are not Aphra Behn specialists, what do you talk about to get them in the room? Is it you talking about innovative forms of women's art? Are you talking about the representation of gender in politics? Because those things are not the exclusive domain of academia. Thank you, Ty, for the nodding, the vigorous nodding. There are a lot of organizations out there that work for and with the representation of women and non-binary people in politics. There are lots of organizations out there that care about innovative forms in art or in women's art specifically. Academics are not the only people with expertise in these fields. I want to get you into a place where you can listen to the conversations that those people are having, to work with them, to learn from them, to work alongside them for maybe a little bit of time, to hear from them and bring it back into academia, and to bring your academic stuff to them and do that kind of exchange, that reciprocal stuff. I have no idea what the outcome of that kind of collaboration might be, and I am okay with leaving that in your hands to work out. So if this is the kind of thing that might interest you, either the more intensive PhD co-op option, if that fits your disciplines, or the potentially less intensive arts amplifier. And let's just throw in PSI and Public Scholars Initiative in there too. Why not? They're also good things. Please be in touch if there's any way that I can be a support and we can help you out. My contact information is in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Letitia. Thank you so much, Henry. Good to hear from you. We're going to pass the mic, to Zoe Kushten, who is the program manager at the Community University Engagement Support. Over to you, Zoe.
Thanks, Jillian. Just checking that you can see my slides. It's all good? Yeah, great. Okay, yeah, so I'm the program manager for the Community University Engagement Support Fund. My role sits in the Community Engagement Unit in VP External Relations, and I sit today and on most days on the unceded territory of the Musqueam people. I joined UBC just a few months ago, actually, and I'm already recognizing some names in the panel, which is really warms my heart, having been quite isolated this whole time, working from home. So I'm going to give you a bit of a run through of the CUES program. I'm going to steal Letitia's phrase, academics are not the only experts in the field. So we at UBC are really enriched by community partners and community engagement. And this is what this fund is designed to support. It's co-sponsored by VP External Relations and VP Research and Innovations. And funds are awarded directly to community partners. We're entering the third year of a 3-year program, a 3-year pilot project, the commitments from Academic Excellence Fund. And it's one competition per year of 500,000 funding envelope available via 2 streams, the Explore stream and the Aim stream. Before I jump into it, I want to caveat this, that because it's a pilot project, things are changing and evolving each year. That's my hope. We've been taking feedback from the past couple of years and changing things. So although the ethos and the reasoning of the fund will remain the same, there could be some little differences from year to year. Oops. So the partners, community university partnerships are what enrich the research and education. And so we want to support the nonprofit sector and help communities thrive. CUES aims to remove financial barriers and prioritize reciprocal inclusive engagement so that all communities, especially those that have been and or continue to be underserved, marginalized, or excluded, can benefit. We have 4 principles of community engagement, and that's what really the CUES program rests on. You've been hearing these from Letitia and from some of the other speakers. Reciprocity, flexibility and openness to learn, transparency, diversity and inclusion. And this really links to the strategic commitments of UBC to engage ethically through the exchange of knowledge resources for everyone's benefit. So I'm going to go into a little preview of what it's been like in the past. There's a lot more information on the website. I'll share those links as well. And you're always welcome to reach out to me if you have comments or feedback or questions. So the Explore stream is for new community and university partnerships. So you've just gotten together, you're just starting the conversation, and that fund is to help is designed to help new and innovative partnerships get off the ground. And that's for up to 15,000 per project. The Sustain partnership is for up to 30,000 per project, and that's where you already have been working together and you want to do more. So this is designed to keep your partnership afloat, to activate previous collaborations, or to dig deeper into some of the impacts of the community. Who can apply? Students, of course, that's why I'm here, and also faculty and staff at both campuses, and community partners, so registered charities or other qualified donees. So you're co-applicants, you're applying together, a UBC partner and a community partner. For UBC students, you do need a sign-off from a UBC faculty representative. And for the community partner should be based in BC, so it's not designed to fund international partnerships. Oh, I deleted that slide, but yeah, the evaluation is a mix of UBC faculty, staff, and community representatives, and the evaluation criteria are part of the application guide, so you really know how you're being evaluated. I'm going to skim over this because the application form is likely going to change, but essentially you provide a description of the project, an identified community need, anticipated activities, expected outcomes, and a budget. There's details about the eligible, ineligible expenses, but I invite you to look at that once you have an idea of your project in mind. With the applicant or co-applicant, so you are co-producing this application with your community partner, and really the strongest applications have clearly been worked on by both applicants. So I'm going to give a really brief preview. It was very difficult to choose projects that have been funded so far. They're all amazing, but I wanted to give a bit of a preview of the different types of projects. So we have the tiny house in the Heiltsuk Nation. This is with the co-applicants, the Heiltsuk Tribal Council and the Faculty of Forestry, and they also had an addition, the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture. And here they identified the community need as a housing shortage, and so they designed and built tiny houses in the Heiltsuk Nation. Here we're going to the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Science and the Iskut Valley Health Services. Here the community identified priority is to build a resource aimed at improving medication use in the community, and the project also aimed to mobilize this knowledge in other surrounding Indigenous communities. The Galatea project, that's with Bard on the Beach and the Department of English. The Galatea project, 6-day workshop in public Galatea. The project aims to expand access to early modern drama and act as a step toward the production of the play. And lastly, Celestial Heritage, so this Dark Skies project engages communities with an interest in Indigenous language preservation, visual arts, night sky preservation, and community-based museum practices. They've actually had to change their project quite a bit due to COVID, but it's still well underway. And that one is the co-applicants are the Haida Gwaii Museum and professor from the Department of Anthropology. So graduate students and queues. I didn't find data for 2018, but 2019 we had 8 graduate students apply out of 76, and 2 were funded from the Faculty of Medicine and Faculty of Applied Science. 2020, I have to be mum because the adjudication process isn't quite complete. We had 12 graduate students apply as co-applicants out of 78. We will be funding about 20 to 21 applications this year. So as you can see, it's quite a competitive fund. And 2021, I'm throwing the ball at you. If you have a great community university partnership in mind, I really welcome you to stay in touch and to apply. I would point out it's a different, I've been in the sector for a long time and have applied to a lot of grants, and sometimes it seems applying to this black box. I really encourage you. You've seen my face now. I'm the one that reads the emails. I'm really happy to respond to your questions by email, by phone, by Zoom. You're not left to your own to interpret application guides and application forms. We're here to help you and your co-applicants. So please feel welcome to reach out, and I will put some links in my email in the chat as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Zoe. Very informative. And our last speaker is Mary Chapman, who is our own director here at the Public Humanities Hub. Over to you, Mary.
Hello. I realize that a lot of people would probably prefer to ask questions at this time because we're pushing on the end of the session. So I'm going to post my entire brief presentation in the chat and open up the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Mary. All right, are there any questions, either Heidi, that you've received over the chat, or is there anybody who wishes to raise their hand and participate that way?
There's been no questions from the chat, so anyone feel free to pose one now.
Everyone is digesting the wealth of information and knowledge that has been shared, and there has been a lot. Thank you, everybody, again, for sharing your experiences, your knowledge, the opportunities around the university.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course. Who's speaking? It's
This is Letitia speaking. I wanted to ask Ty a question about the specific program that you applied to for your government job, because I know there are a number of different programs that help PhD students to get a leg up in government work. I was wondering, what's the name of the one you went through?
Yes, so the name of the program that I'm currently involved in is the Recruitment for Policy Leaders program, and I will post the link here. So it's been going on for close to 2 decades now. It's I think Canada and another, I think Germany, they're the only 2 countries who are who have this kind of program that really seeks to attract PhD students, master students into the public service and start in a senior level position. So yeah, let me just find, I'm sorry, I'm not prepared. I'm going to look for the website and I'm going to post it here.
Policy leaders is a helpful keyword. Thank you.
Yes.
An excellent question. Thank you, Ty. We also have a question from the chat from Minori, sorry, I hope I'm saying it right in one of those attempts, about how this is great and wondering if it would be possible to perhaps create a sort of a find your path / eligibility type of form so that people could more easily be aware and cross promote all of these exciting funds and opportunities. That is an excellent question / suggestion that we will take away. The Public Humanities Hub might have some thoughts on that, I'm sure.
Can I say a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure, Letitia.
The folks who are in the room, we all know each other. I, work with the Public Humanities Hub. Serbian and I have had coffee, things like that. So you can kind of come to any of us and we know about the other ones of us. And so if you're not the right fit for us, you can come to any of us and we'll just send you to somebody else, which is super common in universities, I guess, being sent to a different door. But talk to any of us. Talk to the hub. Talk to the Public Humanities Hub. They're a hub. They're great.
I just want to jump in and second what Letitia just said. Just like Zoe, I also speak with potential applicants who reach out to me. So your emails don't go into a vacuum and maybe get answered. They're all read and we reach out. And I am actually looking at Henry right now, who is a co-op effort between Letitia and I. And we're sitting down and talking, oh, there's this person you have to see. And when he wanted to apply, he reached out to me through Letitia and we sat down and talked, and now he's a public scholar. So just reach out to anybody you feel is closest to you, and you will find the right place, because we know we're all in the same boat pulling together. We are genuinely doing this.
Yeah, it was Letitia that suggested I even sign up for PSI, and then actually then Ty who encouraged me to do so. So thank you to all of you. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Are there any further questions, either from any of our panelists who wanted to ask questions of each other, or especially from our audience? Please don't be shy. Sort of 2 parts here. One is a question for Susan, wondering how far along the collaborative PhD program is right now in terms of being recognized for multidiscipline and solo discipline scholars. And could you see a time when PhD candidates could choose how they wanted to be evaluated according to a diverse set of criteria?
Very interesting. Collaborative PhD, I sure wish we were a little bit further ahead. This thing called COVID intervened. We were we're doing quite well until that. Then everything was put on hold. So we do actually have one group that is getting very close to looking up. And we have others that are interested, but we have possibly funding for one. So so it is coming. It is not going to be immediate, but it is coming. And the other question was, can you see a time where people can choose how to, I mean, it's not choose how to have their work assessed. Is that sort of the question?
Yeah, the question is about the evaluation criteria for dissertations, which right now are still quite narrow. And
well, they're actually not very narrow. If you look at what we ask for examiners, they're very generic. They're very broad. You know, is the background provided? Is the synthesis of the literature correct? Is it, you know, so they're very broad, and we leave it, and I think we have to always leave it with the academics, with the faculty that are assessing it. We can't tell them how to assess it, but we do say we value this broadly. These are the general criteria, which I'm sure you'll agree with. We've had to modify things a little bit because when people have submitted very different dissertations, some people are a little bit surprised, and so we just say we value all this, but the same criteria. Really, it's really the same criteria. That it's rigorous, that it's scholarly, and you can define scholarly in a very broad way.
Thank you so much, Susan.
And
it is now 2 o'clock on the button, so we will we'll stop here. So please join me in a virtual thank you, a virtual round of applause for our panelists today. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you everybody who came to learn and hear about all these opportunities. Have a great rest of your Thursday.